My husband stood up at our anniversary table, tapped a dessert fork against his water glass, and told 11 people who had helped pay for my last treatment cycle exactly whose fault it was that their money hadn't worked. 7 years married, he said, 4 of them in waiting rooms. And I want to thank every single person at this table for carrying us, because God knows my wife's body didn't. One man laughed. The rest of them looked at their plates, which was worse. We were in the back room at Bellamy's on 3rd, the one with the long table and the bad acoustics. 16 covers. My sister on Grant's left. His mother across from me. Theo at the far end with a paper placemat and a green crayon, drawing the same house he always draws, the one with too many windows. Grant held up a folder. Havenbrook Fertility. The Good Clinic. The one with the 9-month wait list and a lobby full of orchids. We signed Tuesday, he said. 28,000 for one more round. 4,300 of that came from this room, so the people who bought the ticket get to hear the truth about the ride. He'd rehearsed that line in the car. I'd heard him do it twice at the red light on 5th. I asked Kirsten to be my girlfriend, he said, 2 weeks ago. She said yes. Nobody moved. My sister laid her hand flat on the tablecloth and spread her fingers, the way she used to when our mother was deciding which one of us to yell at. She's 27 and everything about her works, Grant said. That's not cruelty, that's arithmetic. 4 years of your numbers, 3 retrievals, and I've got a folder full of normal and you've got... He turned his hand palm up and let the room finish it. Delia Marsh, my friend since we were 19, said, Wendy, honey, he's grieving too. Owen Pruitt, who had organized the fundraiser and put in $900 of his own, said, Grant, there's a kid at this table. And Grant said, Theo's a placement. That's a file, not a son. He reached into the folder and slid a page down the table, past the cake, past the candle, until it stopped against my water glass. Withdrawal of consent. County letterhead. Signed and dated Wednesday morning, 3 days before the dinner. 30 days before our finalization hearing. I took my name off the petition, he said. You should have gotten a call. At the end of the table, my son put down his crayon. He is 9. He has been moved 4 times. He knows what letterhead means the way other children know what a fire alarm means. Do I go tonight? He asked. That's the part I need you to hear. Not the sister. Not the arithmetic. A 9-year-old asking, in a restaurant, over a cake with his own name on it in blue icing, whether he needed to go get his bag. I said, okay. 1 word, normal volume, in the voice I use at work when a claim comes back wrong. Then I said, Grant, say the part about the placement again, slower. He smiled. He thought I hadn't followed him. He turned toward the middle of the table so the whole room would get it. And he said it again, louder, with the word paperwork in it twice. And my phone lay face up beside the salt with a small red dot in the corner of the screen, and Ohio is a state where one voice in the conversation is enough. Then I asked the server for the check, itemized, 16 covers, and paid it on my own card. $1,140.68. I asked for the merchant copy and for the reservation printout with the party size on it, and I folded both into my father's pocket ledger, the vinyl notebook I've carried since the September he died. Then I cut Theo a slice of his own cake and answered his question. No, I said. Bedtime's 9, same as always. You want to know why I didn't turn the table over? Here's why. Our hearing was 27 days out and our caseworker had one last home visit scheduled for the following Tuesday. In a placement file, a scene in a restaurant is not a scene. It's a paragraph. And I have read enough paragraphs to know that a paragraph becomes a boy in the back of a county sedan, with his things in a black bag, waiting to be told where he lives now. So I lined up the dessert forks instead. All 4, teens the same direction. I did that while my husband explained my body to 11 witnesses, and my thumb pressed the edge of the table until the nail went white, and nobody saw it, and none of them mattered anyway. Grant got exactly one thing wrong that night, and he got it wrong out loud, in front of all of them. He assumed the letter from that clinic had already been read. He had 11 witnesses. my sister's coat hanging on the back of my chair, and 7 business days before a records office up in Dublin, Ohio answered the request I put in the mail Monday morning. He never asked me what I'd requested. If he had asked, he'd have known a week early what that clinic had already written down about him, and he'd have had time to move it. He didn't ask, so it moved on its own, and it moved toward his mother's mailbox. I want to tell you what I found before it did. 12 hours after that dinner, I was on my basement floor with the 2023 shoebox open, because my father kept every statement he ever received, and I keep every statement I ever receive, and I wanted the fundraiser paperwork while I still remembered who had laughed. Underneath it was a claim I'd filed away in November of 2023 without reading. Urology practice in Grandview. Date of service, October 12, 2023. Member, Frost, Wendy K. Patient responsibility, $180. And a procedure code I know by heart, because I look at codes 8 hours a day for a hospital system, and that code cannot describe anything that has ever happened to my body. He had his own coverage through the company that gave him the badge. He had never spent one day on my policy. Somebody had handed a front desk my card. I sat there 11 minutes with it in my hand. I didn't cry and I didn't call him. I wrote the date on the back of the restaurant receipt. My name is Wendy Frost. I'm 31. I audit medical claims for a living, and I have never in my life won an argument by raising my voice. If you've ever had to be the calmest person in a room full of people who'd already decided you were the problem, tell me in the comments. I'd like to know how many of us there are. And if you want to hear how 9 business days and 1 records clerk took apart everything my husband spent 3 years building, stay with me and subscribe. This one takes a while. Let me back up, because you need to know what 4 years costs before you'll understand why I didn't scream. Grant and I started trying in the summer of 2022. He wanted 3 kids. He talked about them like they were already people, like they had preferences. He named the 3rd one at a wedding in front of his whole family. The first year we did it the ordinary way. The second year we did the other way. 61 injections in my thighs and my stomach. Done at the kitchen counter with an alcohol wipe and a sharps container that lived next to the cereal. 3 retrievals. 2 transfers. We moved to Havenbrook in the spring of 2025, after the 2 cycles in Westerville, which is why that clinic had a chart on me at all. What he announced on the 27th was a $28,000 package for 1 more round. 11 days of bed rest I took without pay. I have all of it in the ledger, dated, because that's what my father taught me instead of teaching me how to argue. In November of 2024, at his mother's Thanksgiving table, Rosalind Halloway asked me to read the clinic's letter out loud. Not to hand it over. To read it. She said the family had a right to hear it from me since the family was helping pay. So I stood in a dining room in Hilliard, Ohio, holding a page with my name typed at the top, and I read numbers about myself to 9 people while the gravy went cold. And when I got to the last line, Grant put his hand on my back and said, "It's okay. We knew." Nobody at that table asked why the man in the marriage had never once had to stand up and read anything. My father died on September 18, 2023. Congestive heart failure, 4 days in Riverside, and he apologized to a nurse for the trouble about an hour before the end. He left me $88,000, which landed in our account on the 2nd of October, and Grant cried when I told him what I wanted to do with it. He said, "Your dad's going to pay for his own grandkid." He said it 3 separate times to 3 separate people. 10 days after that money landed, somebody used my insurance card at a urology practice in Grandview. Theo came to us in April of 2025 as a 2-week emergency placement that turned into something else. He counted the steps on our porch out loud the first time he came up them. 4. And he still does it. He drew our house from the driveway on his 2nd day and gave it too many windows because he liked that we had that many. In April of this year, the county told us we could petition. Our hearing was set for July 24, 2026. The morning after the dinner, I did 4 things, in this order, and I wrote each one on the last page of my father's ledger with the time next to it. I requested my own complete medical file from Havenbrook Fertility in writing, certified mail, return receipt, which I stood in line to send the moment the post office opened Monday morning. Which is a thing every patient in this country can do, and almost nobody does. I requested my full claims history from my insurer, which I'm entitled to as the member. I left a message for a family law attorney named Judith Hollis and took the first opening she had, which was 2 weeks out. And I did not once, look my husband up in the system I have access to at work, because I have a badge and a login and a career, and the fastest way to hand him the win was to become the one who broke the law. Then I closed the notebook, made pancakes, and drove my son to swim lessons. 7 business days it took. Records offices have 30 days by statute, and they move faster when the person asking sounds like an auditor. Grant spent those 9 days moving my sister's things into the guest room. She came on Sunday with 2 suitcases and a laundry basket of shoes. Grant carried them up. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee, and my sister stopped in the doorway and said, "This is just until I find a place." "There's a lamp in the closet if that room's dark," I said. She looked at me like I'd slapped her. "People who take things from you need you to be angry. It's the receipt they came for." Grant told me that night that the master bedroom was his because the mortgage was in his name. I said the mortgage was in his name because my father's money had gone to the down payment in cash, and there'd been nothing left to qualify with. He said, "Exactly. So there's nothing of yours in it." I moved my things into the sewing room. It's 9 feet by 11. Theo helped me carry the lamp and asked if we were going to live in there together, and I told him no, that his room wasn't going anywhere. And I watched him decide whether to believe me. He is 9 years old and he audits people better than I do. Tuesday was the home visit. Gail Whitlock has been our caseworker for 14 months. She wears the same gray cardigan in every season and writes with a mechanical pencil, which I have always taken as a sign of a serious person. Grant put on the navy polo he wears to conferences. He made iced tea. He told her about Theo's swim lessons like he'd ever once been to one. Gail asked Theo what he liked best about living here. He thought about it and said, "The door frame. She marks how tall I get. There's 5 now." Then Grant asked Gail if he could have a word outside. They stood in the driveway by her car for 6 minutes. I watched from the kitchen window with my hands in the dishwater, and he did most of the talking. And once he pressed the back of his wrist to his eye, and Gail wrote in the pad, and didn't write in the pad, and then wrote again. She left without telling me what he'd said. That's procedure. You get told when it's in the file. I dried my hands and wrote it in the ledger. Tuesday, June 30th. Driveway, 6 minutes. The mail that day had the thing in it that changed the shape of the whole summer, and it looked like nothing. Cardinal Med Lending, Cincinnati. Statement of account. Original principal, $46,000. First payment posted February of 2024. Borrower, Grant Halloway. Co-borrower, Wendy K. Frost. Guarantor, Roslyn Halloway. I remembered signing one page. February, in the car, in the parking lot of a Panera in Grandview, with the heater running and the pen not working at first. He said it was the financing for the cycle, and that the rate was better if we both signed, and I signed where his thumb was, because that's what 4 years does to you. You stop reading. You just want the cycle. $28,000 for a round at Havenbrook. Our 2 cycles at the first clinic had cost $19,600, and I had every invoice for it in the shoebox in order. $46,000 had gone somewhere. So I did the boring thing, and I want you to notice how boring it is, because this is the whole trick. I called Cardinal Med Lending, gave my name and the last 4 of my social, and requested the complete origination file on the account I am legally a co-borrower of, application, signature pages, and the itemized provider invoices submitted at origination, because a medical loan doesn't fund without them. Cardinal is a reimbursement product. It pays the borrower against paid invoice documentation, which is the entire reason those invoices had to exist at all. The woman on the phone said 3 to 4 weeks. I said that was fine. I had a boy who needed a ride to swim on Thursday, and a husband who thought I was going to cry in the guest room. I could do 4 weeks standing on my head. His mother called 9 days after the dinner. Monday, July 6, 2:12 in the afternoon. I was in a conference room at work with a screen full of denied claims, and I stepped into the stairwell because Rosalind Halloway has never once called me on a weekday. She was whispering. Not the polite kind. The kind where somebody's in the next room. Wendy. There's a letter here from a urology office in Grandview. It came to my house. It's got Grant's name on it, and honey, I opened it because I thought it was about the loan. Read it to me, I said. It says, and then she stopped. I could hear the paper moving. I could hear her breathing through her mouth. It says he's the one who... Wendy, it says he's the one who... She couldn't get to the end of the sentence. 64 years old, in her own kitchen in Hilliard, holding a page that undid 4 years of everything she'd said to me across a Thanksgiving table, and she could not make her mouth say the second half. So I helped her. Roslyn, I said, there's a line with a date on it. Read me the date. October 12th, 2023. A pause. There's a word here I don't... It says the procedure was elective. A records office in Dublin had written to a records office in Grandview, asking for a surgical history. Grandview did what records offices do. It wrote to the patient at the address in its own file, which had been his mother's house since 2023. Elective. That's a billing word. It means somebody chose it, on purpose, on a Thursday, and paid for it, and drove home afterward and ate dinner across from his wife. 10 days after my father's money hit our account, my husband had a vasectomy he never told me about, at a practice 11 minutes from our house, and he let me put 61 needles into my own body afterward to explain the silence. I didn't say any of that to his mother. I said, "Put it back in the envelope. Don't tell him you read it. He's my son." I know, I said. That's why you're going to have to decide something. I'm not going to help you with it. Then I went back into the conference room and finished the meeting, because there were 9 claims left on the screen, and I have never in my life left work early to have a feeling. My own packet came Wednesday. Havenbrook is thorough. 206 pages, 3-hole punched, with a cover letter from their health information office up in Dublin, signed by a name I didn't recognize. Pages 9 through 14 were not mine. They were an andrology report. A male factor screening, run on June 16, 2026. 11 days before the anniversary dinner, before he stood up and thanked 11 people for carrying us, with a result at the top that read, 0, and a note underneath from the reproductive endocrinologist, findings consistent with prior surgical sterilization. Recommend patient disclose surgical history. Filed in my chart, not his. His chart, I would learn later, said specimen quality insufficient, redraw scheduled, which is how a man buys himself 6 weeks from a clinic that is waiting on him. And on page 102, there was the form that had put it there, authorization to attach partner testing to a shared cycle file. Dated June 9, 2026, a week before the screening, 18 days before the dinner, initialed in the bottom right corner. WF. I know what my own W looks like. Mine has a flat bottom because I write fast. That W had a curl on it, the kind you make copying something upside down off a driver's license laid on a desk. I put the page down. I put my hand flat on it, the way my sister puts her hand on a tablecloth. Then I photographed all 206 pages and titled the folder with the date. Not his name. I never once put his name on anything I made that summer. He came home at 7 with sushi for 3, and he asked me why I was smiling, and I said the claims system had gone down at 4 and we'd all gotten to go home. 2 days later, my sister asked me for my medication. She said it like she was borrowing a curling iron. She had her hip against the counter and her phone in her hand, and she said, "Hey, is the stuff in the fridge still good? Because Grant says we're going to start trying in the fall and it seems dumb to buy new. There were 2 boxes left in the door of the refrigerator behind the salad dressing. Fullesteam and a bag of syringes. $1,100 of it, prescribed to me. Cold chain shipped, the kind of thing you sign for. It's prescription, I said. It has my name on it. Okay, but it's just hormones. The manufacturer runs a returns program. I'll call them Thursday. She rolled her eyes and left the room, and I stood there and did the only thing I am consistently good at. I opened the notebook and I wrote the date, the time, and her sentence, word for word in quotation marks, the way you're taught to write a statement so that nobody can later say you paraphrased. The Monday after that, I opened the banking app on the bus. We had an account nicknamed Theo, not a joint account. I opened it in my own name in 2025, and he was never on it. He had the login, because in 2022 I gave him the login. $19,400 in it, most of it what was left of my father, meant for the adoption fees and then for whatever a 9-year-old turns out to need over 11 years. Balance, $0.18. One transfer, dated the 3rd, to an account ending in the same 4 digits as my sister's Venmo. The memo line said, wedding. Judith Hollis has an office above a florist on Grandview Avenue and a habit of letting you finish. I put everything on her table in the order it happened. The recording. The reservation printout with the party size. 206 pages. The claim from October 2023. The loan statement. The bank screenshot. She read for 20 minutes without talking. Then she took off her glasses. Okay, she said. Here's the shape of it. The affair is nothing. Ohio doesn't care, and neither does a judge. The money is something. The forged initials are the spine, because that's not a bad marriage, that's a document. And the insurance claim from 2023. She tapped it twice. That one isn't yours to prosecute or forgive. That belongs to your carrier and to the state, and once they know, it stops being about your feelings entirely. What about my son? She put her glasses back on, which I have learned is how attorneys tell you the truth. His withdrawal of consent stands. You can't unring it. You can petition as a single applicant, but you'll need 3 things: separate residences on paper, with a lease, an amended home study, and Gail Whitlock in your corner. And Wendy. You cannot confront him. The second he knows what you have, he moves it, and he cries to that caseworker, and then it's a custody-flavored mess instead of a paper case. Do you understand what I'm asking you to do? I said I did. She said, I don't think you do. I'm asking you to live in that house and be pleasant. I lived in that house for 18 more days and I was pleasant. There was one afternoon, that Thursday, when I sat at my desk with our system open on my second monitor. I have a badge. I have a login. Every clinical record in 29 facilities is 9 keystrokes away, and his last name is 8 letters long, and nobody would have caught it for a month. I have personally written the report that got 2 people fired for exactly that. I closed the tab, went down to the second-floor cafeteria, and ate a bagel with the shrink wrap still half on it. That's the whole story of the bravest thing I did that summer. It doesn't look like anything, because here's what I understood by then, and it's the only useful thing I know. He hadn't hidden it well. He'd hidden it in places only an institution can open, and institutions open on request. In writing, by people with standing. I had standing everywhere he'd been. Every single door he'd walked through using my name. I just had to knock in the right order, and I had to not knock early. Theo asked me that night if the hearing being written on the kitchen calendar in marker meant it was real. I said marker was very hard to erase. He accepted that. He is a boy who wants a citation for everything, and I have never known where he gets it. 6 days later, Gail Whitlock called me at work, and I learned what 6 minutes in a driveway buys. Wendy, I need to tell you 2 things, and I need you to hear them in order. The 24th is continued. The magistrate moved the finalization to August 12th. I sat down on the stairs. Concrete stairs, in the stairwell, with the fire door propped by a rubber wedge somebody had been using all summer. And the second thing? We received a report of concern about the home from Mr. Halloway on the 24th of June. 3 days before the anniversary dinner. He stated that you are medically fragile and emotionally unstable following your diagnosis. He described an incident at a restaurant. The restaurant was the 27th, I said. He filed on the 24th. There was a pause on the line, and I could hear a mechanical pencil. Say that again, Gail said. He filed the report 3 days before the incident he described. There are 15 adults who were at that dinner, and I have the reservation printout with the party count on it. Another pause. I'm noting the discrepancy. Then she told me the third thing, which she hadn't planned to make a thing. There's a corroborating statement attached, from a family member. Paper moving. Kirsten Frost. My sister had signed her name to a page that said I was unfit, and she had done it while sleeping in the room down the hall from the boy she was signing about. Gail, I said, what's a concurrent planning conversation? It's a meeting where we discuss alternate permanency options for Theo, she said gently, in case this placement doesn't finalize. It's scheduled for July 28th. I have to hold it. I don't have to like it. I went home. I made spaghetti. Theo ate 2 helpings and told me about a kid at swim who could do a flip turn. At 9, I went in to turn off his light, and his backpack was on the end of his bed. Packed. Toothbrush. The green crayon. 2 shirts folded the way they teach you in a group home, sleeves in, so it takes up less room in a bag. Just in case, he said. I said okay. I said goodnight. I said the thing I say, which is 4 steps. And he said 4 steps back. Then I went into the sewing room and sat on the floor with my back against the door for a while. I want to be clear about what I did next, because it's the hinge of the whole thing. I didn't file. I didn't call the police. I didn't send 1 page to 1 person. I opened my father's ledger to the last page and I wrote 4 lines, each with a date beside it, in the order they'd have to happen. Then I closed the notebook, put it in my work bag, and went downstairs. And then I gave my husband exactly what he'd been asking me for since the 27th of June. He was in the living room with a beer and a ball game, and my sister's feet in his lap. I'm not going to fight you, I said. He muted the television. That's how I knew I had him. A man who is expecting a fight turns the volume up. You can have the house, I said. Kirsten took her feet off his lap. All of it, I said. I'm not filing on the equity. I'll sign a waiver on the retirement. I'll be out by the 1st of August. You keep the house, the Tahoe, and the furniture, and you don't have to argue with me about a single dollar of it. He wanted to know what I wanted. They always ask like it's a trap, right up until they hear a number they like. 2 things. Judith Hollis writes it up as a dissolution, which is faster and cheaper than a divorce and doesn't require either of us to say anything about the other one in a courtroom. You sign the paperwork, and you sign a line saying you've got no relationship with Theo and no objection to me petitioning by myself. He laughed. Actual relief, out loud. That's it. Wendy, I already pulled my name off. I'll sign that twice. Then we're done. I want you to sit with what I gave away in that living room. There is a number attached to it. The equity in that house was $121,000. 88 of it was my father in cash on a Tuesday in October of 2023, because a man who never made more than $54,000 in a year saved for 40 years so his daughter would have a house. I signed it over to my husband on a Friday afternoon at our kitchen table. Judith Hollis called me twice to make sure. She said, "You know I have to tell you that this is a bad deal." I said I knew. She said, "For the record, my client has been advised." I said, "For the record, my client knows exactly what she's buying. Because a dissolution in Ohio doesn't just come with a signature. It comes with an affidavit." Grant had to swear to his assets and his debts, in writing, under penalty of perjury, on a form with a notary block at the bottom. And there was one debt in this world he was desperate to get onto that form, and it was the $46,000 from Cardinal Med Lending, because if that debt was marital, then half of it was mine, and half of $46,000 is $23,000 he'd be walking me out the door with. He didn't just agree to list it. He fought for it. He wrote the description himself and had Hollis's paralegal put it in verbatim, and he was so pleased with the sentence that he read it out loud to my sister across the table while the notary was getting her stamp out of her purse. Medical loan, Cardinal Med Lending, original principal $46,000, obtained February 2024 to finance fertility treatment undertaken for the wife's diagnosed infertility, paid from marital funds. His mother was standing at my counter when he read it, because she was the guarantor on that loan and Hollis's paralegal needed her initials on an acknowledgement of the debt as listed. Roslyn Halloway had had that clinic's letter in her kitchen drawer for 18 days. She was 64 years old. She had made me read numbers about myself out loud to 9 people at Thanksgiving, and she stood at my counter with her hand on a dish towel and listened to her son swear to a notary that his wife was the reason. She didn't say one word. She looked at me once. I looked at the notary. That's when I knew I wouldn't have to do the last part myself. He signed at 4:40 in the afternoon. Kirsten witnessed it. The notary stamped it, and the stamp made that sound they make. And Grant clicked the pen shut and slid it back across the table to me and said, 7 years, and the only thing you ever gave this marriage was a discount. Then he asked me for a favor. He said the fundraiser money should still go to Havenbrook, since the cycle was still happening, just with Kirsten in the chair instead of me, and he wanted me to be the one to tell the group chat. It's $4,000 when. It'd be weird coming from me. I said okay. The sequence is the only part of this story where I was in control. By Friday, July 24th, I had, in a folder, on paper, a recording of him telling a room of 16 people that my son was a file, the reservation printout with the party count, a report of concern he filed 3 days before the incident he described, a corroborating statement signed by my sister, 206 pages from a clinic including a June 16th result that read 0 and a June 9th authorization with initials that were not mine. An insurance claim from October 12, 2023, billed to my member number for a procedure my body cannot have, a bank record showing $19,400 leaving my son's account with the memo wedding, and a sworn, notarized witnessed affidavit in which my husband stated under penalty of perjury that $46,000 had been borrowed to treat me. And on Monday the 27th, Cardinal Med Lending's origination file arrived, 7 pages of it, and I finally got to see what $46,000 had been borrowed against. 4 invoices, Havenbrook letterhead, cycle packages, medication, monitoring, storage. Total, $46,000 and change, dated January and February of 2024. Havenbrook had never treated me in 2024. In 2024, we were at a smaller practice in Westerville, and I had every one of those invoices in a shoebox in my basement, in order, and they came to $19,600. Somebody had made 4 documents on the letterhead of a clinic he sold to. I sat on the bus with those 7 pages on my knees for 4 stops past mine. Here's what I did not do. I didn't take a picture of them and send it to him. I didn't drive to his mother's house. I didn't put anything in the group chat. I filed nothing that Monday. Nothing on Tuesday either, because I had a boy with a packed backpack, a concurrent planning meeting on the 28th, an amended home study that needed a lease with my name on it, and a hearing on August 12th. And there is a right order to knock in, and the order is not the order your hands want. So for 8 days, my husband got to believe he had won everything. You should know what he did with those 8 days. He was not idle. Not one of those days did he leave alone. On Tuesday the 28th, I sat in a county conference room for the concurrent planning meeting with a folder on my knees, and I said almost nothing. Gail Whitlock read the report of concern into the record, and then she read the date on it. And then she read the date on the reservation printout with 16 covers on it. And a supervisor named Mr. Ledbetter asked her to repeat both dates. Then I put a flash drive and a dated transcript on the table. Gail read one line of it into the record. That's a file. not a son. And Mr. Ledbetter asked her to spell the word placement. The meeting ended with the placement intact, pending the hearing on August 12th. Gail walked me out to the parking lot and said, "Off the record, get me a lease." I got her a lease on Thursday. 2 bedrooms on Chelsea Avenue, above a garage, $690 a month, and a window in Theo's room that looks at a maple tree. I signed it with my own name, which is the name I never changed, which is a sentence I have thought about a lot since. I moved out on the 1st of August. He watched me carry boxes and he did not hold the door. Now here's the part I promised you. 8 days from the 27th of July to the 3rd of August, my husband believed he had won everything there was to win. And a man who thinks he's won stops being careful. He doesn't get quiet. He gets generous with himself. On the 29th, he sent the message to the group chat himself, because I never did. 11 people had put in $4,300. He thanked them, told them the cycle at Havenbrook was moving forward in September, said there'd been a change in the mother situation but not the plan, and asked whether anyone could stretch to another $8,000 because the package had gone up. He solicited $8,000 from 11 witnesses for a cycle at a clinic that had already written down on June 16th, in a document then sitting in a folder on my kitchen counter, that it was medically impossible for him to be part of. Owen Pruitt screenshotted it and sent it to me at 11:40 at night with 3 words. "Is this real?" I typed, "I'm not able to talk about it yet. Please save the screenshot." He wrote back, "Saved. All of them. I have the Venmo records too." On the 30th, while I was at work, he painted Theo's doorframe. I need to tell you about the doorframe. When Theo came to us in April of 2025, he was small for 7 and he didn't eat much, and he had been in 4 houses. I put him against the frame of his bedroom door with a book on his head, the way my father did with me, and I drew a line in pencil and wrote the date next to it. By that summer there were 5 lines. 3/4 of an inch, over 16 months. He measured the gaps himself with a ruler. Grant rolled 2 coats of eggshell white over all of it because, he told Theo, the room had to be neutral now for a nursery. Theo told me about it in the car on the way to swim, looking out the window, in the voice kids use when they've already decided something is their fault. "Do you think I should stop growing?" he asked. "Because then there wouldn't be more lines." I pulled over into the lot of a hardware store and turned the engine off, and sat there with my hands on the wheel for a second. I said, "Buddy, we're going to do the whole wall on Chelsea Avenue, floor to ceiling, and I'm going to write your name on every single one." Then I went into that hardware store and bought a 2-pack of Carpenter's pencils, and while I was in there, I chipped a flake of eggshell white off the sample rack with my thumbnail. That's not a metaphor. There's a paint chip in a snack bag in my ledger and it's dated July 30th. I filed the next morning, Friday, July 31st, and I did all of it before 11 o'clock, and none of it was dramatic. And every single piece of it was something I had the legal standing to do because he had used my name to do everything he did. First, my insurance carrier's special investigations unit, not my employer, not anyone's clinical system. My own carrier, on my own policy, as the member, reporting a service billed to my member number that was never provided to me. He had his own coverage through the company that gave him that badge. He had never spent a single day on my plan. Claim number, date of service October 12, 2023, provider name, and 1 line. I request written confirmation of receipt. Second, Havenbrook's compliance officer, in writing, hand-delivered, with a copy of the June 9th authorization and a copy of page 11. Subject line: unauthorized access and alteration of my protected health information by a non-employee vendor. Every chart in a system like that has an access log. Every keystroke has a user ID and a timestamp. You don't have to accuse anybody. You just have to ask them to look. Third, Columbus Police, Financial Crimes Unit, Non-Emergency Report, forgery of my initials on a medical authorization, and 4 invoices on clinic letterhead submitted to a lender. Fourth, Cardinal Med Lending's fraud department as co-borrower, formally disputing the origination documents on my own account, with the $19,600 invoices from the actual clinic attached for comparison, and stapled behind them, a copy of a notarized affidavit signed 6 days earlier, in which the borrower swore under penalty of perjury that all $46,000 had treated his wife at a clinic that had never treated her. Judith Hollis called that page the intent. She said fraud is easy to allege and hard to prove, and that in 22 years she had never once seen a man sign the proof himself and pay a notary to watch him do it. And then a fifth thing, which cost $22 in certified mail and certified copies, a written request under the amendment provision, asking that the record filed under my name be corrected and that a corrected notice be issued to every party in the chart. I mailed all of it, drove to work, and audited claims until 5. On the 2nd of August, he had people over. A thing with a cake in my kitchen for the engagement, which had apparently happened. My sister had a ring on. I know what the ring cost because I found the box flattened in the recycling bin the first time I went back for Theo's swim bag, and I looked up the model, and it was $3,200, which is a number I could match against a transfer with the memo line wedding. I took the flattened box home. I didn't say anything about it. I wrote the date on it, and I did the piece of arithmetic that nobody at that anniversary table had thought to do. He had told a room of 16 people that he'd asked my sister 2 weeks earlier. Cardinal Med Lending had her signature on a modification dated the 6th of June. On the 3rd, Grant called me to ask where the good corkscrew was, and while I was answering, he said, "You know, you're taking this better than I thought. Kirsten said you'd fall apart." "I've had a busy couple of weeks," I said. "That's the whole exchange. That's the only time in 8 days I came anywhere near it." The first thing to go was the badge. Tuesday, August 4th, 10:15 in the morning. Grant Halloway walked into the Havenbrook lobby with a rolling case of samples and a box of pastries, badged in at the vendor turnstile the way he had 200 times, and the light went red. He tried it twice. He asked the woman at the desk to check. A man from compliance came down instead of a nurse, and he had a printed sheet in his hand, and he asked Grant to step outside past the orchids and to leave the pastries. Vendor access revoked. All 9 sites Havenbrook's compliance office covers, because compliance does not do it one building at a time. By that afternoon, his employer had him on administrative suspension pending review, which is what a pharmaceutical company does. The same day it learns a rep is named in a compliance referral involving falsified letterhead. His territory was reassigned in an email that went to 41 people, and at 4:51 that afternoon, a record supervisor named Bridget Ames was walked out of the Dublin office by 2 people from HR because the access log for my chart had exactly one anomaly in it, and it wasn't a mystery. Her user ID. June 9th, 4:51 in the afternoon. 7 minutes in a chart she had no clinical reason to open, and 1 document uploaded. An authorization to attach partner testing to a shared cycle file. She never had to touch the June 16th result. The form she uploaded on the 9th routed it into my chart for her, automatically, a week before it existed. Grant had introduced her to me at a company dinner 2 years back as his friend at the clinic. She had been to my baby shower. There wasn't a baby. There was a shower anyway, in 2024, because Rosalind thought it would be nice to be hopeful, and Bridget Ames brought a onesie and a card, and I have the card. Grant came to Chelsea Avenue at 7 that night. He stood at the bottom of the outside stairs because I didn't buzz him up, and he shouted about lawsuits and defamation and what he called my little campaign, and I stood at the top of the stairs with a laundry basket on my hip. "You did this," he said. "I asked a clinic for my own file," I said. "You did the rest of it in June." That's the entire conversation. He said other things. I don't reproduce them because they weren't true. And because the point of standing there was to be the person who did not need to answer. Theo was inside doing a puzzle at the kitchen table with headphones on, which he had put on himself when he heard the voice at the bottom of the stairs. Because a boy who's been in 4 houses knows how to make himself deaf when he needs to. What Grant did next is the reason I stopped feeling anything complicated about any of it. Wednesday, he took me off the phone plan, which meant my number stopped working at 2 in the afternoon while I was at work waiting to hear from a caseworker. I bought a prepaid line on the way home and texted the number to 4 people. Then on Thursday, the joint card declined at the Kroger on West 5th, with $81 of groceries on the belt and Theo holding the milk, and the woman behind us had to wait while I put things back, and I paid what I could on my own debit and put back the strawberries and the ground beef, and Theo said very quietly, "I don't need the strawberries." Grant was in the parking lot. He'd followed us there, apparently, or he'd guessed. He said, in front of my son, at the volume of a man who has decided a parking lot is a courtroom, that I was a liar who was destroying his life over paperwork. I put the bags in the trunk. I buckled Theo in. I drove to the light at Grandview and turned right, and Theo said, "You didn't say anything." I said, "I'm saving it." He said, For what?" I said, "For a room with a stenographer in it." He didn't know what that was, so I explained it on the way home, and he asked if he could see one. And I said probably. Then, on Thursday, August 6th, at 4:12 in the afternoon, Cardinal Med Lending accelerated the note. That's the polite phrase. What it means is that a fraud analyst in Cincinnati compared 4 invoices on Havenbrook letterhead against a written confirmation from Havenbrook that the patient named on them had never been treated there in 2024, and the entire remaining balance of the loan, $39,200, became immediately due and payable. The fraud clause in that note has no cure period, and the letter went to every signature on the paper. Borrower, Grant Halloway. Co-borrower, Wendy K. Frost, whose written dispute was in the file, with her own attorney's letter and $19,600 of matching invoices from the correct clinic, attached, dated, in order. Guarantor, Roslyn Halloway, who in February of 2024 had signed a guarantee secured by a lien on the house she has lived in since 1988, because her son told her it was for her grandchild. And a second co-signer, added on a modification in June of 2026, 3 weeks before the anniversary dinner, Kirsten Frost. His mother knocked on my door at 9 o'clock that night. She had the acceleration letter Cardinal had emailed her that afternoon, printed at the library on Cemetery Road in one hand, and the letter from Grandview in the other, and both of them were folded into thirds, and she had been holding them so long the paper had gone soft. I let her in. I made tea because I didn't know what else to do with my hands, and she sat on a folding chair in a kitchen the size of a closet, and Theo was asleep 11 feet away, so we talked at the volume you use in a hospital. "They can take my house," she said. "They can put a lien on it and sue on the guarantee," I said. "You'd need a lawyer, not mine. Wendy, tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you were confused about the paperwork." I put my cup down. "Roslyn, you called me on the 6th of July. She looked at the window. "You read me a date off a page in your kitchen, and then you sat with it for 18 days. You stood at my counter on the 24th, and you watched him swear to a notary that $46,000 was borrowed because of my body, and you had that letter in your drawer, and you didn't say anything. He's my son. You keep saying that like it's an answer to a question I asked." She started to cry then, and I want to tell you the truth about how that felt, which is that it felt like nothing. 4 years I had wanted this woman to say one sentence in my defense. In 2024, she asked me to read my numbers out loud to 9 people, and when I finished, she said, "Well, now we know." So I did the only generous thing I had left in me, and I did it with a fence around it. I went into the other room and came back with 2 pieces of paper. Page 11, June 16th, result 0, findings consistent with prior surgical sterilization, and a copy of Judith Hollis's dispute letter to Cardinal Med Lending, which laid out with dates that the invoices submitted at origination were for services never rendered. "Take these to a lawyer on Monday," I said. "A guarantor who was induced by fabricated invoices has a defense. That's how you keep the house." She reached for them, and I kept my hand flat on top of them for a second. "This is for the house," I said. "It isn't for him, and you don't get to be in his corner and mine. Pick one before you come here again." She took the papers. At the door she said, "I never thought you were the problem." "You said it out loud at Thanksgiving," I said. "In front of 9 people. I'll walk you down. The second step is loose." The next morning, Friday, August 7th, at 8:40, I sat across from a detective named Bray in a room with a scarred table and told the story in order, with dates, out of a vinyl notebook. I gave her the recording, the transcript, and the reservation printout. She asked whether the room had known it was being recorded, and I said Ohio doesn't require that they know. And she said she was aware of that. She'd wanted to hear how I would answer it. She asked good questions. She asked whether I had ever accessed my husband's medical records through my employer, and I said no. And she asked me again a different way 20 minutes later. And I said no again and offered to produce my own access logs. She wrote that down, and I understood I had just given her the only thing she needed from me, a reason to believe every other page. At the end, she said, "Ma'am, do you understand this isn't a divorce thing anymore?" "It stopped being mine on July 31st, I said. That same Friday at 2:00 in the afternoon, Grant's employer terminated him for cause. Fabricated documents on a customer's letterhead submitted to a lender. There's a clause about it in the handbook, and everybody in that industry knows exactly which clause. At 3:30, Cardinal Med Lending filed suit on the accelerated note in Hamilton County. At 4 sus or so, though I only learned the timestamp later, Havenbrook's Health Information Office mailed the corrected record notice to all parties in the chart, at the addresses on file. Mine on Chelsea Avenue, and his, which was still, from 2023, his mother's house in Hilliard. He came to my apartment that evening with a folder of his own. He'd showered. He had the voice on, the one from the conferences. "I'll give you the house back," he said. "It's not mine to take back. I signed it away on the 24th. You watched me. I'll deed it to you, tonight. You call the insurance people and tell them you made a mistake, and you call the police and say you were emotional, and I'll deed you the whole thing, and I'll walk away with nothing." And there it was. Everything he had taken offered back for the price of one phone call. I want you to know I did not enjoy this part. I stood in my doorway with my hand on the frame and I explained it to him like a claim denial, because that's the only voice I trust myself with. I can't. A carrier's investigations unit doesn't work for me. The referral's already with the State Fraud Bureau. Compliance opened an access audit and it found what it found. The lender's fraud unit made its own determination on its own documents. I'm not the plaintiff in any of it, Grant. I was the member and the co-borrower and the patient. That's all I ever was. I just asked the 4 questions I had the standing to ask. He said, "You'd send the father of your—" He stopped. He actually stopped himself, and I watched him hear it, and neither of us finished it. "Go home," I said. "Your mother needs you to explain the guarantee to her." Saturday morning, my sister signed an assumption agreement taking the whole balance on directly. Grant's idea. He told her that if she carried it, the lender would go easier on his mother. Cardinal's counsel papered it in a single morning because it cost them nothing. The agreement added her as directly liable and reserved every right the lender already held against him and against the guarantee. It released no one. The lien stayed on the house in Hilliard. The suit stayed filed. I drove over there before she went in, and I stood in a driveway at 8 in the morning, and I handed her one page. Page 11, June 16, 2026. The result that read 0. Findings consistent with prior surgical sterilization. "Read the date," I said. "Then go sign whatever you want." She read it. I watched her eyes go over it twice, the way they do when you're looking for the trick. "He told me you'd do this," she said. He said you'd forge something out of your work computer. He said you'd have to, because you can't stand that it's me. Okay, I said. They mixed up the files, Wendy. That's all this is. He said the clinic mixed it up. That's possible, I said. The clinic's health information office is on the letter. There's a phone number at the bottom. Anybody can call it and ask. You can call it from the parking lot. She folded the page in half and put it in her purse, which is not the same thing as reading it. And she said, "You always have to be the one who's right." She signed at 9:15. $39,200. Her name added underneath his, plus fees. I did not put her in the police report. I did not name her in the civil dispute. And when Detective Bray asked me point blank whether my sister had knowledge, I said, "She has a page. I gave it to her myself on Saturday morning. What she does after that isn't mine." That is the entire mercy I had in me. One page in a driveway, 45 minutes before a signature. I've thought about whether it was enough. I've decided that the question isn't mine, either. Saturday night is when he did the last thing. Theo was at the house getting the rest of his Lego out of the basement, which the county had arranged for a Saturday, and Grant took him into the garage and offered him $100. All he had to do, when the lady with the pencil came on Monday, was tell her that Wendy yells. That's it. Just that Wendy yells at night. Sometimes. When she thinks he's asleep. Theo came out to the car with his box of Lego, and he didn't say anything for 6 blocks. Then he said, "He gave me $100. It was in his fist. 2 50s, folded very small. "He wants me to say something about you to Ms. Whitlock." I pulled into the lot of the same hardware store. I seem to do all of my parenting in that lot. I said, "What do you want to do?" And my 9-year-old said, "Can I have a pencil?" He wrote it on the back of a receipt in the glove box, in a hand that slopes downhill. The date, the time, the garage, the 2 50s, and the sentence Grant had asked him to say in quotation marks, because he had watched me do it at the kitchen table every night for 6 weeks, and he thought that was just how people kept themselves safe. Then he asked me to hold the money so he wouldn't lose it, because he wanted to give it back in front of somebody. The 11 people from the dinner turned out to matter more than anyone at that dinner could have guessed, and not because they defended me. 10 of them said nothing for 6 weeks. Owen Pruitt was the one. He's an accountant. He put in $900 of his own, and on Sunday, the 2nd of August, he did what accountants do when something smells. He built a schedule. 11 names, 11 amounts, dates of the transfers, $4,300, collected between April 12th and June 20th, into an account that was not the account it had been solicited for. Then the screenshot from August 6th, asking for $8,000 more. He printed it, signed it, dated it, and gave it to Detective Bray on August 7th without telling me. I found out when she read me the total back over the phone. 2 of the others came to Chelsea Avenue on Saturday and stood in my kitchen not knowing where to put their hands. One of them, a woman named Petra, said, "I want you to know I didn't laugh." I said, "I know, I could hear who laughed." She asked what she could do. I said, "Save your Venmo records and don't post about it." She did both. Delia Marsh, who told a table of 16 people that my husband was grieving too, posted a sunset on the 9th of August with a caption about how there are 2 sides to everything and how she refuses to judge people she loves. She has never called me, not once, in the 4 months since. I've stopped waiting, and it turns out you can stop. The corrected notice came to my apartment on Saturday the 8th in a windowed envelope with the Health Information Office's return address on it, and I read it standing up at my kitchen counter with a dish towel over my shoulder. It was 1 page. Institutions don't get poetic. It said that a records reconciliation had identified documents filed in error under my name and date of birth. It said that an andrology report dated June 16, 2026, and a laboratory result of 0, with a clinical note indicating findings consistent with prior surgical sterilization, had been removed from my chart and restored to the chart of the correct patient, whose initials were printed 1 line lower. It said an authorization dated June 9th, 2026, bearing my initials had been referred for review as a document of questioned authenticity. And the last thing it said in one sentence, "No infertility diagnosis has ever been established for this patient by this practice, and all diagnostic results from 2022 forward are within normal reference range on every measure that was tested." 31 words. I know because I counted them, twice, at my counter, with the water running. 4 years, 61 injections, 3 retrievals, a page I read out loud to 9 people in a dining room in Hilliard while the gravy went cold. A room of 11 friends being thanked for carrying us because my body hadn't. A boy asking me in a restaurant whether he needed to go get his bag. And the whole time, in a database 11 miles from my house, there was never a single line that said anything was wrong with me. I didn't put it in the ledger that night. I put it on the refrigerator, which is not like me at all. And then 20 minutes later, I took it down and put it in the ledger because I wanted it to be admissible more than I wanted it to be visible. The file from Westerville came the same week because I'd asked for that one at the same time. The page I had stood up and read out loud at Rosalind's table in 2024 said unexplained, all female factors within reference range. Unexplained. Within range. That is the verdict I pronounced on myself in front of 9 people while the gravy went cold. The same notice went to Hilliard, to the address he'd been using for his own chart since 2023, so that nothing about him would ever arrive at the house he shared with me. His mother had already opened one of those. She opened this one too. And here is the part that no lawyer arranged, and that I could not have arranged if I'd wanted to. It went into a house where his mother now had a lien on her home, a lawsuit with her name on it, a son with no job and no badge, and a corrected page that said, in the flat language of a records department, that everything she had said to me for 4 years across her own table had been the exact opposite of the truth. On Sunday morning, Rosalind Halloway called every member of that family and told them to come to dinner at 4. Grant came. Kirsten came, with the ring still on. Grant's uncle Dell came, and his cousin and her husband came, and a woman named Frances who has been Rosalind's neighbor since 1988 and who had been at Thanksgiving in 2024, and who, when I read that page out loud that night, had said, "Oh, honey, Rosalind called me at noon and asked me to come, and I said no." She said, "Then can I use the letter?" I said, "It's addressed to you at your house. You don't need my permission for anything that's in your own mailbox." Then I said one more thing, and it's the only thing I asked anyone for that whole summer. "Rosalind, if you're going to do it the way you did it to me. At the table, out loud, in front of everybody. And when you get to the last line, don't put your hand on his back." She said, "Wendy." I said, "That's not cruelty, that's arithmetic. I'll be home if he calls." I didn't go to that dinner. I've never once regretted a room I stayed out of. I know what happened in it because 3 separate people told me, and their accounts agree on everything except how long the silence lasted. Dell says 40 seconds. Frances says it was a minute at least. Rosalind set the table for 9, 2 of the places for people who never sat down, served pot roast, and then, before anybody had picked up a fork, she took the notice out of the envelope, put on her reading glasses, and read it, start to finish in the voice she uses for church announcements. When she got to the words prior surgical sterilization, Grant said, "Mom." When she got to the words no infertility diagnosis had ever been established, he stood up so fast his chair went over backward. She kept reading. She read the phone number at the bottom, and the name of the record supervisor, and the little line about how to request further correction, and then she folded it in thirds and set it beside her plate and said, October 12th, 2023. That's 10 days after her father's money came. Kirsten asked, at some point in there, whether it was possible the clinic had mixed the files up. And his uncle Dell, who is 72 and drives a truck for a bakery and had loaned Grant $600 in June without telling anybody, said, "Kirsten, honey, look at him. That's the moment it ended for Grant Holloway. Not the badge, not the lawsuit. A 72-year-old man with flour on his sleeve telling a 27-year-old woman to look at his nephew's face. 22 minutes later my phone rang and it was him, and he was crying. And he asked me what he was supposed to do now. I said, "You're supposed to correct your record. There's a phone number at the bottom of the page." Monday the 10th. Gail Whitlock came to Chelsea Avenue for the amended home study visit with her mechanical pencil and her gray cardigan. And she measured Theo's window and asked where the smoke detector was, and looked in the refrigerator. Which they do. Then Theo took the receipt out of his pocket and handed it to her, and stood there while she read it. 250s, the garage, the date, the time, and the sentence in quotation marks. Gail read it twice. She asked him 3 questions in a very ordinary voice. Who was there? Did anyone else hear? Where is the money now? And he answered them all and said, "My mom's holding it. I want to give it back in front of somebody." She put the receipt in a plastic sleeve and wrote on the outside of the sleeve. Then she said, "Theo, may I keep this? It goes in a file. Files are good. Files are how grown-ups remember things correctly." He said, "I know." That afternoon, Judith Hollis sent the last piece of paper I ever sent that man. The proposed decree, the waiver, and 1 page with 3 sentences on it. No contact of any kind with the minor child, by any means, and no communication with me except through counsel. And a 3rd line, which Hollis argued with me about for 10 minutes, stating that I would not be seeking to add Kirsten Frost to the civil action. He signed all of it on the 11th. He had nothing left to trade, and he knew it, and I think part of him wanted the 3rd line to mean I forgave somebody. It didn't mean that. It meant I had decided which debts were mine to collect. My sister owes $39,200 to a lender in Cincinnati, and she owes me something that isn't payable in a courtroom, and I am not going to spend the next 10 years of my life running the collections department on it. Tuesday morning, the 11th of August at 8:20, Gail Whitlock called me and asked if I was sitting down. I said I was standing in a parking garage at work. She said, "Then go sit in your car." Theo had mailed her a letter. Himself. He'd taken her card off the refrigerator and a stamp out of the kitchen drawer, and on Saturday, on the walk to get a slushie, he'd dropped an envelope in the blue box on the corner of Chelsea and 3rd while I was inside paying. She read it to me. At the top, in pencil, underlined twice, what I cost. Then a list. 2 columns, ruled with the edge of a Lego. Shoes, $38. Dentist, $115. Field trip to the observatory, $22. Swim lessons, $180. Winter coat, $60. Groceries, which he had estimated at $20 a week and multiplied by 52, and he'd gotten the multiplication right. Haircuts, 3 of them, $54. The dollar for the book fare, and a line that just said gas, $332.50, which I have never been able to account for and have never corrected. At the bottom, a total, $1,842.50. And underneath that, in the same pencil, "Dear Ms. Whitlock," I added it up. "I think I should go back to Ms. Danvers' house so Wendy does not have to pay for me anymore because she does not have the money now, and the man is mad about it. She is a good mom. It is not because of that. Please do not tell her I asked. Theo. August 8th, 2026. I sat in my car on the 4th level of a parking garage with my phone against my ear, and I made a sound I have never made in front of another human being. Gail waited. She's been doing this 30 years. She waited, and then she said, "Wendy, I have to put it in the file, but I want you to know what I wrote on the cover sheet." Paper moving. Child demonstrates strong attachment and age-inappropriate financial responsibility for the household. Recommend finalization proceed as scheduled. He hadn't been packing that backpack because he thought I'd send him away. He'd been packing it so I wouldn't have to pay for him. That night, I did the thing I had not been able to do in 3 years. There's a page at the back of my father's ledger, in his handwriting, which I had opened exactly twice since September of 2023 and closed both times. My father, who never made more than $54,000 in a year, had kept a column on me. 1995, hospital, $1,180. Paid in 22 payments. Braces, 1,900. Clarinet rental, which he'd listed by the month for 2 years and then written quit next to without comment. Prom dress, the deductible from when I put the car into a mailbox at 17. Community college, 3 semesters, listed by semester. A line from 2011 that says, spring coat, she didn't ask. It goes on for a page and a half. He wrote it all down, because that's who he was, and at the bottom he'd totaled it. The way he totaled everything. And under the total, he'd written 6 words. Worth every cent, would do again. RF. I put Theo at the kitchen table and I read him the whole page. The clarinet, the mailbox, the spring coat she didn't ask for. He listened with his chin on his arms. And when I got to the 6 words, he sat up. He said, he wrote it down too. I said, everybody in this family writes it down. He looked at the notebook for a while. Then he asked, can I be in that book? I turned the page and I wrote his name at the top of a clean one, and I gave him the pencil, and he wrote the first line himself, and it took him a while because he wanted the columns straight. Swim lessons, $180. Worth it. Wednesday, August 12, 2026. Courtroom 4C, Franklin County, 9 in the morning. Theo wore a clip-on tie he picked himself, and he counted the courthouse steps on the way up, out loud, and there are 11 of them. And he made me stop and recount because he lost the number at 7. Grant was in the hallway outside 4C. Nobody had told him not to come. A courthouse is a public building, and he still had that voice on, the conference voice, and he was wearing the navy polo. He said my name, and then he said Theo's name, and he crouched down the way men do when they want to be seen crouching. Hey, buddy, he said. Theo looked at me. I gave him nothing. Not a nod, not a hand on the shoulder. I have thought about that a lot since, and I stand by it. He'd asked to do a thing in front of somebody, and my job was to be somebody, not to be the one who did it. He took the 250s out of his pocket, still folded very small, the way they'd been in his fist in the car. He held them out, and Grant didn't take them, so Theo set them on the bench beside him. Then he said, you said I was a file. And Grant said, Theo. And Theo said, I read the file. It says I'm hers. He didn't say it loud. Gail Whitlock was 4 feet away, and Judith Hollis was 6 feet away, and a bailiff was sitting at the end of the bench with a coffee. And all 3 of them heard it, and none of them moved. Then my son said, you can go now. And he took my hand and walked into the courtroom, and he did not look back at that man once. Not in the hallway, not for the rest of his life, so far. Grant sat in the back for about 4 minutes, and then he left, and he left the $100 on the bench, and the bailiff, who did not know any of us, picked it up and turned it in at the clerk's window as found property. Because that is what the man does in a building where everything gets written down. Magistrate Poole is a small woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, and she goes through a finalization the way a good nurse goes through an IV line, calmly, out loud, naming every step. She noted the withdrawal of consent of the co-petitioner, filed June 24th. She noted the amended home study on the residence at Chelsea Avenue, dated August 10th, recommending finalization. She noted the parties living separate and apart since the 1st of August, and the co-petitioner's written consent to a single applicant petition, filed on the 11th. She noted the Guardian ad litem's report, and she noted, because it had been attached to the amended study as documentation of changed circumstances, a corrected record notice from a fertility practice in Dublin, Ohio. Then she read the relevant portion into the record, in a courtroom, out loud, in front of the clerk and the bailiff and a stenographer and my son. No infertility diagnosis had ever been established for this patient by this practice. All diagnostic results, 2022 forward, within normal reference range. She took her glasses off and looked at me over the top of them. Ms. Frost, I don't usually comment. I'm going to comment. Somebody let you carry that for 4 years. I said, yes, Your Honor. She said, it's in the record now. That's the only place it stays permanently. And Gail Whitlock from the second row, without being asked, said, Your Honor, I'd like it noted that in 16 months I never once observed anything in that home that supported the report of concern this office received. I've documented that. It's in the file. I have been in a lot of rooms where people talked about my body. That was the first one where anybody wrote down that there was nothing wrong with it. Then Magistrate Poole asked Theo if there was anything he wanted to say, and he stood up next to his folding chair with his clip-on tie and said, Is it permanent? Like, the paper kind of permanent? She said, It's the most permanent kind there is. He said, Okay, and sat down, and asked me in a whisper whether he could see the stenographer's machine afterward. And he did. And the woman let him press 2 of the keys. At 9:26 in the morning she granted the petition. The order changed his name, which he had asked for himself in June. Before any of this, when he first found out you could. Theodore Ray Frost. Ray after my father, whose column is on the second-to-last page of a vinyl notebook, and whose 6 words are at the bottom of it. On the steps outside, while Theo was counting them again on the way down, my phone buzzed twice. The first was an automated confirmation from the Ohio Department of Insurance Fraud Division. Case opened. Referred for prosecutorial review. No action required by the reporting member. The second was from Judith Hollis. 3 words long. Sheriff served Monday. The Hamilton County complaint had gone to the house on Bellevue at 8:40 on the 10th of August, in a manila envelope with a return address, and Grant had signed for it. Because someone has to sign. Plainly, for anyone who needs it. I never raised my voice. I never opened a chart I had no right to open. I never told a single lie, and I never sent one page to one person who wasn't already legally obligated to look at it. Every door that closed on that man in August, he had walked through in June, using my name, and the only thing I ever did was ask each of those doors, in writing, what he'd carried through it. Then I took my son to get pancakes at 11 in the morning on a Wednesday, and he ordered a side of bacon and asked if we could get the good pencils for the new wall. It's December now. 4 months. The maple outside Theo's window went yellow and then bare, and last Tuesday it snowed, the wet kind that doesn't stick to the road, but sits on the branches all morning like it's been assigned there. Let me tell you where everybody landed, because I keep a notebook, and I'm going to use it. Grant Holloway was charged on the 3rd of September in Franklin County. Forgery, for the initials on the June 9th authorization. Identity fraud, for the use of my member number at a urology practice in October of 2023. Insurance fraud, for the claim that came out of it. Falsification, for swearing to a notary that $46,000 had treated a wife who was never treated. Theft by deception, for $4,300 collected from 11 people for a cycle that could not medically occur. He pleaded to 2 counts on the 19th of November. Sentencing is January 14th. His lawyer is asking for community control and a payment plan. The restitution figure in the agreement is $62,900, $19,400 for the account with my son's name on it, $4,300 for the room at Bellamy's, and $39,200 for a lender in Cincinnati, which collects once, from whichever of the 2 of them pays first. My son's 19.4 comes at $300 a month for as long as it takes. He is 36 years old, and he will spend a large part of his 40s writing a check every month to a boy he called a file. He has no badge. Pharmaceutical companies keep exclusion lists, and every hospital system in Central Ohio keeps a vendor bar list, and those lists talk to each other. He sells commercial flooring now for a company in Grove City, and he lives in his mother's basement in Hilliard, in the room with the water heater in it. And in October, he had to do the last thing, the one I think about most. He had to write to a records office and ask them to correct his own chart. In writing. With his date of birth and his address and his signature at the bottom, requesting that a document be moved from a file where it did not belong into the file where it did. Same office, same form. $22. Everything he had, he got by making a piece of paper say my name instead of his. He'll be a man with a file for the rest of his life, and the file will be accurate. My sister owes $39,200, jointly with a man who has nothing, plus fees, plus interest. On a note she consolidated into her own name on a Saturday morning 45 minutes after I handed her the page in a driveway. Cardinal's analyst accounted for most of it eventually. 2 credit cards, a transmission, and a week in Nashville in 2024 that I was not on. $26,400 of it nobody has ever found. Cardinal got a judgment in October. 25% of her wages, and she works at a salon in Upper Arlington and a restaurant on weekends. She sold the ring back to the jeweler in September and got $1,100 for a $3,200 ring, which is what happens. She left Grant in October. She lives in Rosalind's spare room now, the one over the garage, and the two of them share a bathroom and a mortgage payment and a son. She texted me on the 22nd of November. 4 words. I didn't know when. I haven't answered it. I'm not going to say never. I'm going to say that I have a 9-year-old whose reading is 2 grades behind because of 4 houses in 6 years, and my evenings are full. Rosalind Halloway kept her house. The lien came off on the 6th of October because a guarantor who was induced by fabricated invoices has a defense, and she took the 2 pages I gave her at my door to a lawyer on a Monday exactly like I told her to. I'd do it again. I don't want that woman's house. She sent a Christmas card last week. It's in the shoebox in the basement, unopened, filed under the date it arrived. She hasn't picked a corner. And I meant that literally. Bridget Ames was terminated for cause in August, and her credential went to her certifying body in October. She spent 7 minutes in a chart for a man who brought pastries. The log of those 7 minutes will outlive her career. Delia Marsh has never called. 8 of the 11 never called either, but Owen Pruitt built a schedule, signed it, and dated it. And because of that, 11 people are line items in a restitution order with their names spelled correctly. Petra came to Thanksgiving. I did not get my father's $88,000 back. I want to be honest about that because I hate stories where the woman gets the house. The house sold in November and the money went to Cincinnati and to the restitution fund, and my name isn't on any of it. I traded it for 2 sheets of paper on a Friday afternoon in July. One of those sheets is the reason a magistrate had a corrected notice in front of her on August 12th. The other one is stapled behind 4 fake invoices in a file in Cincinnati. I would sign it again right now, at this table, with the same pen. Theo Frost is 9.5. There are 7 marks on the wall of his room on Chelsea Avenue, floor to ceiling, in carpenter's pencil, with dates. He grew 1.25 inches since August, which is more than he grew in the 16 months before it, and his pediatrician says that's a thing that happens and doesn't say why, and I know why. His reading tutor comes Tuesdays. He can do a flip turn. He keeps a column in the vinyl notebook in the kitchen drawer, and last month he added a line that said, "Haircut, $18, worth it," which is not how the column works, and I am not correcting it. In October, his class had to write down what they want to be. He read his to me at this table. He wants to be the person in the courtroom with the little machine. He said, and I'm quoting the paper because I kept the paper, "I want to write down exactly what people say so nobody can change it later." I asked him if he was sure, and he said the woman let him press 2 of the keys and that the machine had a strap so you could carry it. Then he asked me to spell stenographer, and I did, and he wrote it down. There are 3 steps on our porch here. He counted them the first day, out loud, the way he did at the old house and the way he did at the courthouse. And now when we come home from swim in the dark, he counts them again. 3. And I say 3 back. and we go in and turn on the kitchen light. Last Tuesday, with the snow sitting on the maple, he asked me whether we could put a mark on the wall for the day the paper got signed, even though nobody grew that day. I said that's exactly what the wall is for. One thing before I go, and it isn't advice. My father used to say that the only thing that survives an argument is a receipt with a date on it. I thought for 31 years that he was telling me how to handle money. He was telling me how to survive people who are better at talking than I am. I have never once won by being louder, not one time in my life, but I have never lost when I had the paper. If somebody is telling a room that you are the problem, you do not have to convince the room. You have to find out which office holds the document, and then you have to ask that office, in writing, as the person who has the right to ask. And then you have to be patient in a way that feels like losing. So here's my question for you, and I actually want the answer because I read these. What's the thing you were blamed for that turned out not to be yours at all? And did anybody ever write it down? Tell me in the comments. I'll be down there. If this one meant something to you, subscribe so the next one finds you, and if you know a woman who's been quietly carrying somebody else's diagnosis for 4 years, send it to her. That's all I've got. Thank you for staying with me. Go count your own steps. I'll see you next time.